Good afternoon. On February 26, 2 years ago, a devastating earthquake struck Turkey and Syria, claiming more than 50,000 lives. The province of Hatay was hardest hit. It alone accounted for more than half the fatalities. When we visited the site about 3.5 weeks later, the destruction was overwhelming. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble, most buildings were uninhabitable, and hundreds of thousands of people had been displaced. This map of Antakya, which is the provincial capital, shows in red the structures that were deemed unsafe, a graphic reminder of the scale of the loss. Faced with such devastation, we asked ourselves, how can design genuinely help? How can we guide recovery rather than simply rebuild what was lost? Antakya's story reaches back over 2 millennia, from the Hellenistic Antioch to the Roman and Ottoman periods. It grew as a place where cultures and faiths met, often around food and shared public life. Before the earthquake, the city was facing many familiar challenges to many other places: rapid growth and urban sprawl, limited public space, and traffic congestion. Our key question became, how do we balance restoration with renewal, respecting the city's memory while improving daily life? Research, understanding, and listening were important parts of the process before translating those insights into a strategy to restore Antakya's sense of place and improve resilience. Through a series of interviews with local residents, we learned about the memories of a city with shared courtyards, narrow alleys, and close-knit communities. We completed these stories with a web-based survey that allowed displaced families to share their experience and favorite places in Antakya. And we also met and workshopped with our client, consultants, and local stakeholders to test and evaluate ideas. We realized that preserving the sense of place is central to collective healing. Our methodology began by recalling lost relationships, the scale of streets, courtyards, and blocks that gave Antakya its distinctive character. We began in the historic center, the area designated as a priority reconstruction zone. To illustrate our thinking, we focused just on a single representative block. Our ambition was to retain the familiar structure, the pattern of blocks and alleys, while introducing pockets of open space for the community. We defined envelopes that reflected the scale of the pre-earthquake fabric and introduced subdivisions to increase permeability and reflect the rhythm of buildings that was so characteristic for Antakya. We further refined the massing to respond to the local microclimate and context to create a final layout that is rich in texture and it reflects the diversity and urban character of Antakya. Ultimately, we want to bring back the familiar rhythm of everyday life where children can play and move away from cars and traffic. We want to design spaces where communities that suffered unbelievable grief and loss can come together again, not to forget, but to commemorate and celebrate the resilience of those communities. And we want the streets that once were the arteries of the city to again host public life and commerce. Building on that priority zone experience, we expanded the framework of what we learned to the wider city. Our approach rested there on 4 principles: rebuild on safe and resilient land, restore the city's spatial memory, grow inclusive public realm, and rebuild recognizable neighborhoods. The floodplains of both the river and the local streams had been encroached by development over the years, increasing the exposure to natural disaster risk. Our plan restores those streams with widened buffers for flood resilience, and in turn creates a series of linear parks and wetlands for the adjacent communities. What is a city's spatial memory and where is it? A group of locals were asked by the author of this map to describe in a single memorable word the places in Antakya. Mapping out these responses created this map of social interactions, not just highlighting the main streets, but also the main plazas and high streets in the city. These main streets west of the River Asi had been characteristic with their radial layout, with many of the streets converging into the riverfront civic center. Our plan restores this structure and refines the hierarchy for easy navigation, providing adequate space for pedestrians, cyclists, and public transport. Interviews also revealed the patterns of co-locating between certain shops and the intimate link between living and working. Shopkeepers often lived above or beside their stores. Our plan creates a network of local high streets that ensure that everybody's daily needs are met in a short walk from their home. And by creating an active ground plane along the major routes, we bring vitality back to the city. Re-establishing community landmarks is equally vital. Most schools and cultural buildings were destroyed, yet their sites remain meaningful. Our strategy reinstates social infrastructure on these familiar plots, reinforcing memory and accessibility before infilling areas that were underserved. Throughout the master plan, we created a network of community routes that connected with the social infrastructure to the master plan. These micromobility links also functions as routes to resilience hubs in case of an emergency. Overall, we were able to double the provision of green spaces from 12 square meters per resident to 25 square meters per resident, made up of different typologies of open space, from linear parks along the streams to the local plazas and parks. The River Asi today is canalized and inaccessible. It is our plan for it to be renaturalized, allowing Antakya citizens to again connect with the landscape that shaped their history. Having built up the structure of the city with linear parks and the street network, we then created 13 districts, each formed a 15-minute city. Utilizing the building condition dataset, we identified structures that were still in sound condition for habitation, and we were using these buildings as the starting point. We then overlaid the road hierarchy and the local high streets and created bigger commercial clusters at the intersection of major routes. Along these community routes that I've mentioned earlier, we placed all the amenities and the plazas for the community to come together. Continuous residential frontages and taller buildings define the edges of those districts, and eventually the residential buildings will start to fill out each of those districts. Applied across all of these 13 districts, this approach forms a coherent strategy for rebuilding Antakya, creating homes, jobs, and resilient communities for the hundreds of thousands who lost almost everything on that February morning. This project is of a scale and complexity that we don't encounter that often. What we've shared is not a construction-ready blueprint, but a strategy for recovery, one grounded in memory, resilience, and collaboration. Rebuilding Antakya will demand partnership at every level, but it begins with a shared vision to restore both the fabric and spirit of this remarkable city. Thank you.